Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Zach Meckler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name's Joe Kuzma, and once again, I am joined by one of my brothers from another mother that isn't named Brian. He might be a host who enjoys toast. I can't honestly remember, but you know him as, at least on this program, the Professor Zach Meckler. Zach, man, what's going on? I mean, we call you the Professor all the time. Does that ever get on your nerves, or is it kind of stuck finally?
No, it seems like it only ever got on the nerves of the couple people that listened to the podcast and then proceeded to block me, thinking that it was my fault that was a thing, as if I asked for it. I don't care, but apparently they took some personal offense to it based on some other people. I don't even remember. I know it's their loss as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I get there's other professors. We mentioned this before. You were actually working on a doctorate, was it? At one point,
position, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, for all intents and purposes, you would have been the professor, anyways. But we just call you that because you're just you're one of the brightest guys or most intelligent guys, particularly in the realm of football. I don't want to call you a know-it-all because obviously you're always learning, just as I am. But you know, we lean on you a lot for a lot of things, and particularly even the draft. So we each. Oh, yeah. Well, we each are wearing our own hats today because we're going to have a fun one. But before I get to that, the last push or plug as I wheel little dusty roads as you wheel for all my wrestling guys out there. But if anyone wants to join us down in Jacksonville, Florida, I understand. I know there's all kind of crazy stuff that's going on right now, and we don't quite know the plans. We don't have a schedule, so we don't know the date. But if this is something that would interest you, and you're thinking about maybe going down to Florida to check out the Steelers game later this year, there are packages for a full VIP private party type tailgate experience down in Jacksonville, as well as a game ticket included that start at $145. If you're interested in that, hit us up on social media. We'll see your message there. You could email us at fanmail@steelcityunderground.com, or we also have the number you can call. You can leave a voicemail if you prefer, if you want a text. We just need to know how many you're interested in and things of that nature. And by all means, if you feel comfortable, leave a phone number for callback as well. That's 203-900-4SCU. And of course, this information just stays with us and our partner, which is Gameday Tailgate Experience. I don't, sell this information to anybody else, but it was, we're putting it out there as an early bird thing. As they were one of our website podcast sponsors and partners 2 years ago when the Steelers were down in Jacksonville, and it was a good time, great weather, and all kinds of stuff. A really crappy game though, if you remember that one, Zach. It was Ben getting picked off, forcing it to Antonio Brown, but then Ben put the team on his shoulders and ran about the slowest, I think 4 or 5 yard touchdown run, stretched out, made it all the way. You still weren't sure unless you saw the replay in the stadium, but it was a terrible tile black and gold invasion down there. It was a blast. So I encourage anyone who might be thinking about something like that, go ahead, hit us up. You'll probably see some other Steelers affiliated platforms such as ours. They're all kind of doing the same thing. No one's really, this isn't like a commission sales or anything like that. They just happen to be very good friends of mine that I'm, helping them out with this. And, I get to go to the tailgate party, obviously, but I got to MC that the last time with Isaac Redmond, and that was a lot of fun, man. So, although Isaac, not really the orator, a man of few words, but he was a cool guy, and it was pretty neat because it was almost like if you didn't know him to know him, he was just like another guy that was there. So you're going to be able to bump elbows with some people like that. They haven't gotten that far into announcing it. Of course, we don't even know when we're all allowed to get unlocked from our cages yet. So, but once we get that information, we'll send that along too. But we're collecting the last of it right here before the draft. I'll pass that along, and then we'll find out more details, I guess, as this goes along. Of course, we do have something that's going to take our minds away from all the chaos that's out there. in the world today. The NFL draft's still going to be going on, not in the same usual fashion as me and you have discussed here on the show prior. Kids aren't getting, I don't know. I was thinking about this. I'm like, do you ship them a box of 32 draft hats and they put one on like a Zoom or a Skype or whatever, video conferencing? And I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work. Usually, the top guys that are the green room guys, they even get a jersey. They don't get to go on stage. They're not in Vegas. Probably better maybe for some of these young men that you're not in Las Vegas. It could be a lot of trouble, man. I'm telling you, especially with your favorite thing right now is, it's Tuesday and the rumor mill and the speculation is starting to run. This was your pet peeve on the last show. Now we're starting to hear, hey, so-and-so may rise, so-and-so may fall.
Yeah, going back, I have seen that the guys that are the ones that were quote unquote virtually invited were all sent boxes that have the equipment they're supposed to set up in their living rooms or wherever they're watching the combine or the draft, where they have like the little media set up, and I guess they were given hats and things like that. So it's trying to be as realistic and potentially possible for whatever circumstance may happen. But in terms of the rising and falling thing, I know I talked about on the last podcast. That's a big pet peeve of mine. I think the media and draft Twitter, we get spoon fed this information that may or may not be correct. We get put these things in our mind where, we get so enamored with late round prospects that we can never imagine why they're still on the board in the 7th round and we thought they're going to go in the 2nd. We see these guys that get picked in the 1st round or the 2nd round, and, draft Twitter had a 5th or 7th round drafted grade on them, and we sit there and we start pounding our fists on the table saying how bad the franchises were for doing that. And my entire stick with all of this is the fact that these teams have personnel departments and scouting departments and the GMs and the coaches and all this stuff that spend a year and sometimes more looking at these players. And like in cases like Devin Bush, it was well documented the Steelers began scouting him a year prior to last year. So, they had a good, 2 years of time looking at Devin Bush before they knew they wanted him to be their guy. So, you have these teams that put all these resources and time and energy and money into getting the best information they can. They meet with these players, which is a resource that we don't have the opportunity to do, where they go in there and they sit down with interviews and get to know these guys on a personal, emotional, mental, psychological level. There's a lot of psychologists even that come into these interviews and whatnot and put these players through tests and whatnot to see what type of guy they're getting. So it's the whole notion of these guys rising and falling. There might be some things that pop up, like I know medical red flags sometimes do pop up very close to the draft. And I think this year that might be more of the case because teams don't have the opportunity to get their own doctors to look at these players like they have in prior years when they come in for pre-draft visits, in the official 30 visits. But other than that, the whole concept of a guy shooting up boards because of something with tape or something like that, this year, more than any, that's even less of a thing as far as I'm concerned because these coaches have had no opportunity to watch as much tape as they wanted to under this quarantine. So, I think it was Mike Tomlin that came out there and said he's watched more tape this year than he has probably ever in his entire career because of just the unparalleled time allowed to do it now with all the quarantine stuff. But the notion that these guys are rising or falling 2 days before the draft as if these GMs and coaches and owners are just scurrying around last second all willy-nilly is just a fallacy, I think, for the media and draft Twitter to kind of sit back and try to rectify why their big board looks the way that it does. Or one, I think it was Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus made the comment about who these people are that are leaking the rumors. They're the scout in the corner who's being ignored by the rest of the draft room because their takes are so outlandish that are leaking these to any ears that'll listen to them. I don't think that's an unreasonable take. Yeah, because the entire notion that these guys are moving around boards this late in the game, there are guys that I'm sure will move up or down when something comes out, or you'll see a Laramie Tunsil situation, which is a video gets leaked the night of the draft, which killed his stock. But it's not real as far as I'm concerned. These boards have been relatively set in stone within a round or less for a couple months now, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't see, these rumors on Twitter. These are more for fans, as far as I'm concerned, to get the excitement all riled up, and then it's over, and then we're sitting there saying, well, why did we ever listen to that?
Yeah, and you know what? It was Sam. I thought you were going to say this one. He said I think it was this morning. He tweeted out, "We've now crossed 100 potential first-round draft picks."
Yep.
Everybody's a first-round draft pick. I mean, I even said that back when Mason Rudolph, when the Steelers got him in the third round. Oh, they had a first-round grade on him. I made the, kind of out the side of my mouth. Like, who doesn't? Like, everybody thinks everybody's going to be this first-round pick. It doesn't always work that way. I mean, you look at Stephon Tuitt is a good one that I think of too, because I remember him being somebody that was legitimately maybe thought of in that aspect, but he was coming off an injury too, I believe. Yeah. So he fell. I mean, it was, but seriously, you have 32 picks in the first round. You can't have 100 guys that go in the first round. That's putting you out into, well, the compensatory picks. Steelers are what, like 102? I have it here somewhere, of course. Yeah, 102. Wow, that was great. I'm doing enough of these mock drafts. I'm getting the actual overall number right now too. Oh, you know what? Speaking of which, I guess we're going to talk about this because we're going to be mocking the mock drafts. So let me hold that thought for 1 second because I'm going to want to hear yours. I haven't seen yours yet. Yours gets published on the website Wednesday morning. Mine already went up, so I could tell everybody now finally who I took. And I'm still I'm teetering around on it. I almost want to kind of change, but we'll talk about that as we get into these other picks too. But they are, I guess EA Sports was working with something with the NFL. I originally heard this, or was it ESPN or both or something? There was supposed to be some type of virtual kind of stage with the players done up and everything like that. So I don't know if that's still a thing. I know there's all kinds of things the NFL has sent out as far as interactive and things like of that nature, guess the pick and everything like that. So they're really trying to probably engage fans even more than usual, just because they know everybody's kind of sitting at home for the, I guess, unless you're essential. I'm not saying I'm non-essential. I've been working at home, so that's been nice. Pat myself on the back, I guess. But I wouldn't mind sitting on my butt and not doing anything. Not to mention, but on the other hand, knock on wood, I still got a paycheck coming. So I know there's some people that aren't in the same boat, and they could use the distraction. It seems like the NFL is doing a little bit more even than usual in that aspect. Maybe even employing some extra people, which would be kind of nice. There is one other thing too, as far as one of their big sponsors, the big beer sponsor with the NFL. You see Bud Light everywhere, and they've been pushing their version of their seltzer, the White Claw thing.
Oh yeah.
And part of that campaign now is, and they're doing it, and I guess they're donating money. I don't know if it's just first responders or healthcare workers or people that are displaced or out of work. Kind of Coors Light's been doing that too. But they want you to do these videos where you send them your booze for Roger Goodell. And we were just talking about that. And I was like, oh, my God, it's perfect. Did they listen to the podcast to get that idea? Or somebody was there? So Roger's still going to get booed. You may not even have to pipe it in. It might be a commercial that runs or something, or several during draft day. So that's going to be kind of neat in and of itself. So I guess it's time to really, we're still talking draft here. And I mean, the draft's going to be a pretty big occasion, just not for us Steelers fans. So when you hear from us Thursday night after the first round, we're probably just going to be talking about all the guys that are left, because we're not going to be able to talk about anybody that Steelers actually selected, unless we want to do a show about Minkah. We could do a show about Minkah Fitzpatrick. I keep getting reminded, well, the Steelers got the best first-round pick out of all. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to disagree from that logic whatsoever, but it's still the same. I'm going to be sitting there, and it's not quite like, the excitement, the wind got taken out of my sails. I was very excited about Devin Bush, but as soon as pick 10, I'm not used to it being that early. I'm used to watching about 20 picks from all the other teams, biting my fingernails, waiting to see who's going to be left for the Steelers to take it, 24 or 25 or something, or 32, when they had that luxury after a Super Bowl win. And they moved up to 10, and then all of a sudden it was like, do I even want to watch the rest of this, or do we just want to start talking about Devin Bush? Because I'm excited. I want to go run around, outside and shout it from the mountains. And there's not going to be any of that. The best I can do is probably make fun of the Bengals or the Browns, potentially the Ravens if they select another tight end, and that'll be about that. And we'll talk about that too, because they've been mocked practically the same quarterback. I'm going to hold it. I'm going to keep it in my that ace up my sleeve for a little bit later here. But we are mocking the mock drafts. That means we're going to make fun of some of the experts. Oh, he's the first one on the list. I didn't even know that. Of course, it comes from Mel Kiper Jr., so hopefully it's wrong. But Mel Kiper Jr., ESPN's draft expert, air quotes in the air here, Zach. Jalen Hurts, quarterback, Oklahoma, over the Steelers at pick 49. The other Zach, I hate that both of you guys are Zach, because then you try and team up, even though you don't spell your name the same way. But as we call him, Flash, if he's even listening to this, he says in the back rooms, he's like, it's not even that it was him. I get you too confused sometimes. I think it was him that said,
it was him, yeah.
Yeah. He said, he's a fine player, but they're making me hate him just because they keep mocking him to the Steelers, especially with the second round pick. And there are people who are debating whether or not he even lasts that long to 49. And, does he read defenses, or is he this super athlete? Is he the next Lamar Jackson? There's all these things that are floating around. I think even more like ridiculous than the Steelers being mocked him, because I planted my flag on the quarterback thing. This is such an unnecessary pick that's just going to further clutter the room. You know what I mean? People are like, oh, trade Mason Rudolph for what? Like a bag of peanuts? You get even less for Duck. They'll just wait for him to get cut, and maybe they'll bring him in as another camp arm, and maybe he wins a QB3 job just like he did last year. Eventually. I guess he didn't actually win it yet. Josh Dobbs was the guy who won it and then got traded. And I think people say, well, they traded Dobbs, but it's like, who are they going to have? Another guy who hasn't taken an NFL snap as your backup quarterback as a rookie, not even a camp yet. And that's the guy you want to put behind Ben, who you're questioning whether he's healthy or not. I know everybody's thinking about the future. They're thinking about like passing on Dan Marino and Terry Bradshaw getting hurt and not being able to do it, and Mark Malone and Bubby Brister and every other name that's come through in between that 70s dynasty all the way, until the later part of the Bill Cowher years when they got a Super Bowl. And it's just, that might happen. There's no foolproof way that taking Jalen Hurts is insurance from it not happening. I think, though, it's even more ridiculous is people have mocked Hurts over to the Baltimore Ravens to be a backup for Lamar Jackson when they already had Trace McSorley, which Trace McSorley kind of makes it, easy for them to move on from RG3, I think, is maybe a backup. Now that he's had a year like in the league, and he had a pretty good showing in the preseason too. They just I guess they build that bridge there where the Ravens have, many other needs other than quarterback right now. Here, let's take another young quarterback just because he kind of fits the same mold.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with Zach's logic. I mean, I don't hate Jalen Hurts. I mean, he currently, as it stands, with my big board coming out, he's my number 5 quarterback. I think he possesses enough developmental talent that he can use him, because I think he did take a nice progressive jump forward here as a senior here at Oklahoma after he transferred. So I think realistically there is enough talent to make him into a worthwhile quarterback. But the notion that Pittsburgh's going to draft him, or really any team drafts him, he's not fit to start right now. He has things that he needs to get out. So if he does get drafted, it's going to be by a team, or not if, when he gets drafted, it's going to be by a team that realistically doesn't need a quarterback. It's going to be a developmental quarterback. And if he gets drafted by Pittsburgh, fans need to realize that Pittsburgh traditionally has never pushed their rookies to play early. People will say, well, Ben Roethlisberger started as a rookie. He was quarterback 3 going into the season. I mean, he was the 11th pick, quarterback 3. He was behind both Tommy Maddox and Charlie Batch. He took 2 unfortunate injuries to push him into the limelight, to which he never looked back. Now, he was the future. You don't draft the quarterback at number 11 and have him not be the future of the franchise, or at least hope that he can turn into that. But he got pushed into that sooner than later. Mason Rudolph, as a rookie, was not the number 2 quarterback. That was Josh Dobbs, and it was only because Dobbs had beaten out Landry Jones. And I'm sorry, Joe, I think that was the right move at that point in time. I'm sorry, I know.
Man, you know what? And Landry had a decent, he had a preseason where they kind of just shelved him. It seemed like he had it in the bag, and everything just kind of changed because Dobbs had this amazing preseason. He led 6 touchdown drives and maybe 8 overall scoring drives. He looked like a leader out there for sure. And then, wow, you talk about night and day compared to last preseason, and then he's expendable. So, and I know some people also speculate on that too, as to whether or not would it have been any different if Dobbs plays last year? I don't think it's any different. If anything, I think you change your offense even more, or maybe, he tends to use his feet a lot too. He would run, maybe he would look at one progression and then take off, and maybe it gives you a little bit of more life, but I think it's just as ugly as watching Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges play. If you would have had Josh Dobbs play, who's to say Jalen Hurts is any different of that type of quarterback? I mean, I could definitely be proven wrong. He can go somewhere and become a superstar, but I just don't see the fit or the need with the Steelers at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, he definitely, with Dobbs, you had that extra mobility, and I think you get that with Hurts. I do think Hurts has a better arm than Dobbs does, and I think if you're comparing the two, he definitely would make more sense. Now, if it was a situation where it was like, they're looking to draft Dobbs like they did, I think Hurts would be a fine addition, but they had a different backup situation at that point in time. And quite frankly, I don't know if Hurts will ever be a starter. I think there's enough limitation there to be concerned about his arm talent if he'll ever be the guy. His mobility is what's going to get him to that point. And he doesn't, but the thing is with him, he doesn't possess the same mobility and athleticism that Lamar Jackson did, in terms of looking past his arm talent coming out, because Lamar Jackson wasn't a bad arm talent, but he wasn't quite where he needs to be. And as far as I'm concerned, he's still not quite where he needs to be. He's still developing as a passer, but he had that elite athleticism that made him a very exciting prospect to consider. Hurts is a very nice athlete. He's durable, he's strong, he's tough, he's a leader, he's a winner. And he progressed nicely as a passer this past season at Oklahoma, which I think a lot of that's just the change in system to the Big 12. But I'm not looking at him right now as we speak as a guy who I'm putting my flag in the ground saying he's an heir apparent type of quarterback, especially with the Steelers system. Now, it could be a situation where they would take a guy like Jalen Hurts and they do what the Ravens did and they change their entire system to cater to that quarterback, which you kind of have to do. You don't want to be the team that tries to fit a square hole into a square peg in a round hole. You want to be the team that's going to cater to the most important position on that offense. But I don't see the fit. I don't see the need. Especially looking at long term. I know Ben has came out and said that he doesn't see if the team wants to do it. He's going to respect their decision because he knows he's not going to play forever. But I think he would rather have the additional talent around him. And I think the Steelers would be beneficial to add talent around him instead of adding a guy who'll be quarterback 3 this year. And then when Ben does walk away, you're looking at a situation where maybe he's competing for a starting gig with Mason Rudolph, and maybe Mason Rudolph beats him, and maybe Hurts never gets that job. Instead of maximizing Ben's window now when you have Ben, even though we don't know what he's going to play like next year coming off this elbow injury, you still know he's the starter. There's no question about it. And I do believe when the Steelers do ultimately move on from Ben, or Ben moves on from them and goes off into retirement, if the Steelers go after a quarterback, I don't see a scenario where it's not in the first round. I think there's too many question marks hitting. I mean, quarterbacks aren't a guarantee to begin with. But the longer you wait to select one in a draft, the more question marks there are. Every team wants a Dak Prescott in the 4th, or a Tom Brady in the 6th, or a Russell Wilson in the 3rd. But there's so many other quarterbacks that get drafted in that area too that never pan into anything more than a quarterback 3 journeyman. So I think if the Steelers were to do it, it'd be earlier on, and I don't think earlier on is this year. I think there's better quarterback classes potentially coming up in the future where there's at least more exciting prospects other than a player like Joe Burrow. So I just, that type of move doesn't make sense to me. There's the potential, like I said, for the athletic aspect to be a very tantalizing aspect of his game, but I don't see it. I have nothing against Jalen Hurts as a prospect. I like him as a prospect. I enjoyed watching him at both Bama and at Oklahoma, but I just don't see the need or the fit for a team like Pittsburgh.
Hey, did you see the thing that Eric sent over by any chance? It was a way too early 2020 mock draft from last April 29th, 2019. And yeah, and he had the Steelers, what were they at, 20th on this, 21st. So he had them finishing better than the Ravens. And Jacob Eason was the pick then with the first pick. So obviously not knowing that the Steelers wouldn't have a first-round pick, but not too far off there with 21. But Jacob Eason, I think, that didn't materialize necessarily the way maybe that he would have thought. I don't know that he's in the first-round conversation at all. You just never know. Like, sometimes things get really surprising. Like E.J. Manuel, for example. You know what I mean? The Bills, just reaching because they had to have a quarterback. You know what I mean?
Teams fall in love, and we can't predict when that's going to happen, especially this year more than anywhere. This has all been hush-hush with all these virtual pre-draft interviews and whatnot, so it's tough to tell.
Yeah, it really is. And, it's fun to make fun of some of this. And then sometimes what ends up happening is that this could always come back and bite us in the rear end. Some of these are actually pretty sensible picks, though. We get into, I don't know who your pick is. So I'm going to go here. I think at least one person, it was Luke Easterling of the Draft Wire, had my pick in my mock was J.K. Dobbins. And I had gone with Dobbins specifically because I'm biased. I'm a homer with Ohio State, although there's a number of other ways, as we mentioned ad nauseum on the last show, where you could go. You've almost talked me into tackle now, particularly if somebody like Cam Akers they feel would be there, but it's going to be like 50 picks later. Or there may be somebody that they feel has kind of that upside. I mean, you remember James Conner was the 8th running back taken in his draft class, and he was also he was the compensatory pick too, was he not? Or was he before that? He was.
So him or something. I can't remember which.
You know what? I'm going to find that because now I'm drawing a blank, but it was in that same ballpark, if I remember correctly, and we'll see if I'm right or not. The Internet of all things just seems to be dragging its rear end today, man. I'm telling you. Just things don't want to work. I don't know what's going on. Everything's crashing. Would you guys stop Netflixing and chilling over there and you're quarantining? All right, let me see. James Conner was 105 overall. Hey, feather in my cap. Cam Sutton went first at 94. So, yes, hey, good memory here. The steel trap still working. So with Dobbins, and I know we're all looking, we were discussing whether it could be a running back. I'm like, what if a tackle's there? What if a wide receiver's there? I think I'd be happy with all of it. But for me, you know what? I have to pick one. I can't be flimsy on this and wishy-washy and flip-flopping and backpedaling all day long. So, I made my pick. I threw my dart. Dobbins. If it is or isn't, who cares? That's not what's necessarily important to me being right. It's just trying to fit a need and make it make sense. And there's a few of these that are in that same ballpark. There's quite a few Jonathan Taylors from Wisconsin. And let's see, Jacob Harrison, Sporting News has Jonathan Taylor. There were a couple of them here as I was looking. Ray Fittipaldo thinks it's Jonathan Taylor as well from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ryan Wilson, CBS Sports, thinks it's Jonathan Taylor too. I think we've seen a few other ones. Certainly they looked at running backs. They looked at Taylor. And our biggest knock on him hasn't been that he isn't a talented athlete. We're worried that do you get into the same kind of territory where you have a guy that has a lot – I don't even know. Is that fair? A lot? Many? What's the proper word for how many touches he had in college?
A lot is probably underselling it. I mean, almost 1,000 touches in 3 years is a lot of touches is 700, 600 touches. He has whatever more than a lot is.
Yeah.
He has an absolute, just a crazy amount of touches when it comes to his production.
You get a car off lease. Most leases 3 years long, 36 months, right? You're looking at about 40-ish thousand miles, maybe. You're like, okay, this is still kind of a newer car. And I think with Taylor, you're looking at what, like 85,000 miles, 90,000. Like it's not, it doesn't have the same allure to it anymore, does it? And I think there's going to be some cause for concern. In fact, you talk about speculation and rumor mill, and a lot of the draft Twitter, they don't maybe think of this the same way. But I think I actually heard Jim Miller and Pat Kerwin, maybe even Gil Brandt was talking about this. I listened to a lot of the Sirius XM NFL radio, and somebody had brought up this exact thing. This scares front offices. So, Taylor looks like he could be a fit. I don't know that they necessarily go there, but you know what? There's somebody else that might fall in love with him, and he may not even be there at 49 to begin with. There was somebody who was talking about Deandre. We haven't even mentioned Deandre Swift, have we, at all? Because we don't believe he would be there at 49. There was someone just the other day that was talking about he could end up being there, and I'm like, what do you do then?
Yeah.
I don't buy it, but I mean, you never know. It could happen. But I mean, I was just going to stick with the running back, the skill position thing. And I'm like, you know what? Dobbins might be a safe play for somebody who's actually there to I wanted a 50-50 need and maybe get it right type deal. But I don't know who your top pick is yet.
Yeah, so I mean, speaking of Deandre Swift, he is my top back in this class. It's a very thin margin because I think, honestly, the top 4 or 5 backs in this class, I don't think you're going to be wrong with. I think all 5 of them, if you don't know, it's Deandre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, and or Edwards-Helaire, not in that order necessarily, but I think all 5 of them are going to go if they get drafted in the right situation. They could all find success in the league. I don't necessarily like Swift's or Edwards-Helaire's fit in Pittsburgh when it comes to a size point. I think they all are fine backs. I just don't see it being the type of running back that they look for. They like for kind of the bigger, grittier, type of backs, and I just don't think they fit that mold. I'm not going to release my top pick yet. I want people to be surprised by it, but
come on,
it shouldn't be surprised because I've mocked him to the Steelers in podcasts and things like that numerous times. Back from Florida State, but I just with Jonathan Taylor, if it wasn't for all the mileage, I don't think it'd be a question. He's the most talented back in this class, minus the fumbling issues. I think that's his biggest knock is his mileage and the fact that he has, I think it's 1 fumble for every 54 touches, which, people are trying to defend the 18 fumbles as being, well, he has so many touches, you're bound to fumble more. It's the rate at which he fumbles. It's 1 fumble every 54 touches. That's not a good rate to have, especially if you consider the average run. If he gets 150 to 200 touches a season in the NFL, you're looking at, 3 to 4 fumbles a year. That's not a rate that you want to have as a pro football player. So, but I think if he is there at 49, I wouldn't be surprised to see him be the pick. I think from a scheme point, from what he brings to the table, size-wise, athletically, he makes a lot of sense for Pittsburgh. I just personally believe that there's a chance that he's not going to be there because I still think a team will pull the trigger on him because year one, even early on, you can monitor how much wear and tear he gets as a pro. And he's been durable. It's not like he hasn't been durable. It's not like he's been getting all these touches and getting hurt every season. He's been a durable piece for Wisconsin. And he could turn into a Frank Gore type of player who, is in the league still for his 70th season. And he's, putting up monstrous numbers and is producing at a high level. He's tapered off, but he's still a consistent and reliable back. He could turn into one of those guys, and the mileage meant nothing, and some team's going to get a steal as a running back where he ends up going on for a long, productive career and stays predominantly healthy. But that's a massive risk you're taking by taking him. But with Pittsburgh, if they were to take him, you're at least given the situation where James Conner in 2020, when healthy, will be the starting running back no matter what running back they draft. He's going to be the guy. I think that will help, give some ease to Jonathan Taylor's body. And even if he is healthy, he's probably not going to eclipse 15 to 20 touches a year, or a game in Pittsburgh anyway. And Steelers have a tendency to get in some of these shootouts. That's going to take a lot of pressure off of him anyway. And it's going to put more strain on Ben's shoulder anyway. So I think the Steelers, if they were to take a guy like Taylor, would find a way to make sure he doesn't keep adding on all the wear and tear that he's had while he was at Wisconsin. I think the pick makes sense. I'm not going to be upset whether it's Dobbins, Taylor, or Akers. I think all 3 fit what the Steelers do from a size perspective, an athletic perspective, and just schematically. So I just think Akers long-term gives you a very high ceiling. You saw what he was able to do at Florida State with basically no help around him, no offensive line, and he was just able to create all this stuff. The Steelers, even, with the regression that we've kind of seen over the last year or so, they still have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. They still have a top 5 line as far as I'm concerned. So I think you have a scenario where he can get some holes to run. He has enough speed to break it open in the second level. He's a downhill, strong, compact, chiseled running back. I think he could push for touches early on. And I think he would hopefully make, a situation where they don't have to dish out a lot of money to James Conner. They can let him walk, especially if he can't stay healthy. And Cam Akers could be a running back in the future. I just think it makes the most sense for who should be there at 49 and who potentially has a lot of upside that not as many people talk about as they should. But I think Dobbins, Akers, and Taylor all make a ton of sense at 49. Just depends on who's there and which direction they choose to go in.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be upset with that pick at all. In fact, that's the other Zach, your counterpart. He had him in the 3rd round. I don't know if he lasts there. That's my fear. Otherwise, I would try and mock him there. I've seen him there when you're dealing with simulators and things of that nature. But I don't know, man. It's
hard.
It is. It's a gamble. It's, if the Steelers were only like 30 some picks between, slots there, if they had their actual third round pick, maybe, you know what I mean? A lot of people too, they think, hey, you could trade back and just get the guy, but you have to find a suitable trade partner that's willing to move up. And like we both said, I think KC there, Kevin Colbert, is going to be a little, chomping on the bit to get that pick. But you never know. You never know. It depends on the Steelers don't have a whole lot of draft capital. So if you're only moving back 10 spots, depending on, who you're falling behind in that order and what you're looking at, you're trying to guess what everyone else is going to pick, including the team that's swapping with you. They're not telling you, you know what I mean, necessarily. Because look at last year. I mean, the Broncos, John Elway. How did John Elway not know the Steelers were interested in Devin Bush? I mean, come on. He tried to act like, hey, we would have taken him there if we didn't have a trade. And they were also he was discussing that, the Steelers didn't say that's who they're taking. I don't think that's part of the deal here. Otherwise, that could really screw with some things. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So that I don't think that happens. There could be some people you trust, and you've been doing this a long time. But I think you have to be thick as thieves when you're doing this, and a little bit cutthroat. In order to give your team an edge or an advantage. So. That's where I'm at with some of these picks too. I didn't necessarily mind. Some of these are still trickling in. We don't have all of the big names, so to speak. We kind of miss Mike Mayock doing this. He gets to do it for real. Anyways, RJ White, CBS Sports said Lloyd Cushenberry, guard center from LSU. I don't hate that pick. What do you think?
No, I mean I would not lose a single ounce of sleep. I would sleep so soundly on Thursday or Friday night if that was the pick. I mean, I've flirted with the idea of putting Cushenberry in Pittsburgh. I mean, he has the guard center flexibility you want. He played predominantly center for LSU, but I think early on he could very easily move into a guard spot and then eventually bump inside when Marquise Pouncey rides off into the sunset. But he makes a lot of sense. Athletic, leader, long arms for interior offensive lineman. That's the biggest thing that always stands out to me. You don't see a lot of times we bump these linemen down to the interior because of things like arm length and athletic ability. His arms are incredibly long for a interior offensive lineman, especially a guy who plays center, and that could really benefit him well working around some of these big, powerful, quick, penetrating offensive line or defensive line that you see in the league nowadays. I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. I know it's not a sexy pick. Fans might discount it, but when Cushenberry potentially becomes a fixture on that offensive line for the next decade, no one's ever going to look back and say that was a bad pick. I think Cushenberry's upside is that of a Pro Bowl offensive lineman. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but I think at bare minimum he's a very good offensive lineman in the league. And I know this interior offensive lineman class has been knocked, especially by me, but Cushenberry is one of the guys I think, regardless of what year it is, he would be a first 2 round. He'd be a top 50 player. I think he has that type of talent, and I think he should be there at 49. I know I've seen some mocks where he falls to the 3rd round, but you're gambling at that point in time. I don't think he lasts that long, so I wouldn't lose any sleep over him. I think it's a very smart pick. It's not the sexy pick. But it definitely would help give some support up front, especially with the departures of Ramon Foster and B.J. Finney. And then, who knows what's going to happen long-term with guys like Matt Filer and, Marquise Pouncey and getting older. You have no idea. So make the smart move, not the sexy one.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of sexy moves in all of the mock drafts that we've been doing. This has been good so far. We haven't really been mocking as much as we had mocked. I mean, we started with Hurts, obviously, and we don't hate the player. We just hate the fit. We don't hate the game either. Jalen Reagor, wide receiver, TCU, Penn Live, Jacob Klinger. We were talking wide receiver. Is there more than one? Yes. There's another wide receiver. John Newman, fan-sided. Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame. And I'm trying to see of the ones that we've called together so far. That's what we had right there. And I know our other buddy, the other Zach, had what's his name? Higgins. T. Higgins as his. And it's like, I don't hate on any of those necessarily either. I could definitely see the fit. We discussed that before. That could definitely work too as far as a wide receiver. I don't know. Do we really need to be a broken record about the wide receivers? Should we get to the ones that we thought were really dumb, or maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I think receiver makes sense. I don't know if it's. I don't see it being the pick, but if one of these top guys falls, like if Jalen Reagor's there and Steelers fall in love with him, I know they met with him at the combine or wherever it was. Could be the pick. I'm not going to bash it. It's any talent that helps Ben out is fine with me as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you get some of these blogs that are under the Sports Illustrated umbrella, and it almost looks like they're officially Sports Illustrated type writers, but it's the same thing as like an SB Nation or a Fansided or anything like that. And there was a gentleman named I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name. His name is Logan, who picked. Now he had a Lions blog, so he's not a Steelers guy, or maybe even an overall NFL guy. Maybe he's just throwing some darts out there. So he picked Marlin Davidson, a defensive lineman from Auburn. But on the Steelers, on the All Steelers blog, Ryan Sakamoto picked a Neville Gallimore, a defensive tackle from Oklahoma. And we've seen some other guys go out there. There was one in particular. I'll protect the guilty. If you read it, you'll know and you'll laugh. But it was what was it? Do they not view nose tackle or defensive line as important as we do? And it was like, who are you speaking for? As we? They would be the Steelers organization. And one of the mock drafts didn't have like anything like that, and they were almost like offended that it wasn't like a defensive tackle. But I don't know, we talked about this a whole lot, but okay, they lost Jayvon Hargrave, but Jayvon Hargrave made his money mostly because the other guys were hurt. He was in there like a third of the time. I think I went through the snap counts not too long ago. Yes, he was a beast. Yes, he was a favorite of mine. I absolutely loved him as a small college guy coming out of the third round. I thought he had tremendous value for the Steelers. And, now he's got a huge payday. He's with the Eagles. They couldn't retain him. They just don't have enough money to do that. But his physical role, folks, the Steelers, 3-4? 30% or less of the time they're in the base 3-4. This isn't like the old mid 90s or whatever, the Blitzburg, Dick LeBeau defense where you have Casey Hampton in the 2000s or whatever dotting the I there. It just does not work the same way. Those big guys like that aren't usually on the field, and when they're only in those packages so often, what you usually see is you would see maybe Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt as the two down linemen, and they're usually flanked by Bud Dupree, TJ Watt, in the most usual circumstances. And when Tuitt was hurt, that's where Hargrave was coming in, or in a rotational situation, he would come in and get some snaps there. But Tyson Alualu would also kind of do that same thing and has played nose tackle. They traded for Chris Wormley, who we just talked about, just says what, defensive line or defensive tackle?
No, it says nose tackle.
Or nose tackle. It said nose tackle. Colbert said he wasn't playing nose tackle. Who knows? Cats and dogs getting together, that sort of thing. So, missing a guy. Isaiah Buggs was the guy that they drafted too. That looked like maybe like the great value brand Jayvon Hargrave coming in last year as a rookie. So they got a lot to work with there. Maybe that's why it's not a priority, because the cupboards aren't necessarily bare.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people have speculated the Steelers are going to go after defensive linemen, and touching on the two players that were listed here, Marlin Davidson and Neville Gallimore. Davidson, I think both are fine players first and foremost. I have day two grades approximately on them. But Marlon Davidson is the equivalent of drafting another Isaiah Biggs or Tyson Alualu or even Cam Hayward when it comes to schematics. Not even Cam Hayward. I say more Stephon Tuitt from where he aligns. I don't view him as a true interior defensive lineman that can play nose. So at that point, you're drafting a guy where you already have 5 players on the roster at 49, and none of them are really at jeopardy of having their spot taken. The player who has the most jeopardy of having a spot taken is Isaiah Buggs. I think the Steelers' usage of him and how he improved last year, I don't think he's a risk of losing his spot. Davidson would probably be an upgrade over him, and I know Alualu is going to be a free agent after this upcoming season, so the need might be there in the future, but I don't see the need in taking a guy like Davidson at that spot. He's a fine player. I'm sure he'll carve out a decent career for himself as a defensive lineman, potentially as a rotational, maybe a starter, but he doesn't fit what the Steelers are looking for right now. Neville Gallimore, I think, is more in tune with what they had with Jayvon Hargrave, and I like that pick a little bit more. But again, looking at the value of where you're picking him, I know the nose tackle, and I mentioned this before, is the one spot where the Steelers truly don't have a starter in place. I don't envision them wanting to go and draft a guy in the second round, 49th overall, who, may play 30% of the snaps any given week. I know we look at Jayvon Hargrave's snap count this past season that largely took a skyrocket because of the fact that he has the ability to bump out to like a 2-eye or a 3 technique on the guard and be a one gap penetrator, which is what his role is essentially going to be in with the Eagles now as a one tech, as just a one gap upfield penetrator. That's why I think Gallimore is. I think he's a upfield one gap guy who probably should play in a shaded nose as an A gap penetrator with an even front team. I think that's his best fit. And I think he could have success in Pittsburgh. I mean, Jayvon Hargrave really fit that mold coming out too, and he did well as a penetrating nose tackle. I just don't see the need of drafting one at 49 overall and using that capital on a guy who's going to be, no matter what year it is probably not going to play any more than at most 40% of the snaps. I think that's a large investment for a position that can be found later on in the draft, because a lot of these guys that are predominantly just 2-down defensive linemen that go early, they don't need to go early because there's not a lot of value for 2-down defensive linemen when it comes to draft capital. That's why you see guys like Lakai Fotu, whatever his name is, from Utah, however you pronounce it. He's a top 10 defensive lineman who's probably going to slip a little bit because there's just not the need for a 2-down lineman in a lot of positions. I know I do have a defensive lineman being mocked to the Steelers on day 3, but he's a 2-down lineman who I think has the talent of a much better lineman, but there's just not the need because there's so much time spent in sub-package football. There's still value because you still want to have a guy who can stuff the lanes and, clog run lanes in their base defense when they are in the base defense 30 to 40% of the time. But that's not a position of high value for draft capital. And that's the thing that I think gets lost in all this. I have no problem with any alignment on either side of the ball. I'm all for alignment. That's where my heart always is and always will be. But I just don't see the need, especially when you consider the fact that we've seen packages where they bump Cam Hayward down and play in the shaded nose, or Tyson Alwala or Isaiah Buggs got a lot of opportunity there as well. And who knows, maybe the Steelers feel confident with one of these XFL signings, like a Kevon Walker type of thing, where they come in there and they make an impact. And the one player that gets lost in the mix of all of this, because he's not a fan from Steelers Nation, is Dan McCullers. You and I have talked about it. In his limited snap counts, he's improved under Carl Dunbar. He's not flashy. He provides nothing as a pass rusher, but he's disruptive and he's a big body and he's began to play with some decent leverage. And it seems like they're content just signing him the 1-year deals every year. But if his role is just as that, maybe the Steelers quietly feel confident with his ability to provide, a role as a 2-down lineman who comes in for certain snaps and just stuffs the run. I think he has improved the last 2 seasons and does not get any recognition for it because of fans in Pittsburgh like to hold on to the very first impression they have of a guy. And that was a guy who was 6'7" and played like he was 6'7". So I think that the Steelers' lack of interest. I mean, the only defensive lineman I've seen truly linked to them is Ross Blacklock from TCU, and he will not be there at 49. I'll be stunned if he's there at 49. And I saw a thing where they met with Doug Costin out of Miami of Ohio, and he's an undrafted type of guy. So I haven't seen any connections of any defensive lineman. I don't see them going one early unless someone miraculously falls like a Raquan Davis or something like that. But I don't see the need. I don't see the position versatility. The Steelers have plenty of depth on the D-line. They could use a body at nose tackle who's a true 0-tech, 1-tech interior D-lineman who can just be a 2-down role player. But I don't see that being worth taking at number 49.
Yes, I have nothing to add to that, man. I mean, it's just I don't see it. I didn't even mock anyone defensive line. I ended up going later round linebacker and edge, just based on that's kind of where you're at. The Steelers sometimes they straight gold with some of the later round linebackers, and a lot of those guys are going to slip later and have some better value maybe than if you were to wait on, let's say, a wide receiver, for example. Could even be true of a running back, to be honest. So that's kind of where I'm at. There was the one that you really, really disliked, and it was, let me see. I'm sorry. This wasn't Jacob. Jacob Harrison wasn't the Sporting News. I had a typo there. That was Vinny Iyer. This was Jacob Harrison. That was from Fansided. we talked offensive line, and this was now I'm not as ingrained in the whole draft process. You did a big 350 board that's coming out. You got all the positional rankings. You get spreadsheets upon spreadsheets. So I'm told you probably have those under lock and key. But for me, I saw this, and I am a homer for Ohio State. But when I saw Jonah Jackson as 49th overall as a guard, what was the first thing I said to you? He's not a second rounder, is he?
Yeah. I've been, I'm sure Jackson has fans out there. I'm not one of them. There's a fascination with him because, he came from a transfer situation as a redshirt senior. He came to Ohio State, which, has put out some very solid offensive alignment in recent years. And I think, he's gotten caught in the mix with that. But I think that when you look at the tape, you can't, he spent his previous seasons before he came there, he was at Rutgers, which has not been known as a football factory. And I know he put up.
No.
I know. I know he put up some opportunities, for some all conference accolades whenever he was, a freshman and things like that there. But the tape was not good. And I think had he not transferred and been a grad transfer, he'd be a guy that we wouldn't be having a conversation with as a draftable prospect, in my opinion. I don't think he's a bad prospect. I think his ceiling is a guy who you see plays his rookie contract, then bounces around the league as a depth lineman for a team that's just looking for a veteran option. I think that he has flexibility to play guard and center, which is something I'm sure the Steelers will be, appealed to because they love to have that versatility, as we've seen with guys like Chris Hubbard and B.J. Finney and even Matt Filer bumping from tackle to guard. And, just from a fundamental standpoint, though, I don't see it. He's a stiff, upright player. Hand placement's not what you need it to be. He doesn't get extension on anything. And, when you're looking at his run blocking, the Steelers run the ball, and they like to get it downhill in a hurry with their running scheme. And I don't see him being a guy who's going to ever create that type of push there. I think he's a decent pass blocker. I think he did a good job last year trying to keep Justin Fields upright and allowed him to be one of the guys we saw in the contention for the Heisman. But I don't see him being a guy. I think there's too many flaws that need to be worked on that would not allow him to be taken in the second round. I think there are pieces. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and say he's never going to be anything. I think he has a chance to put a career together. I just don't see him ever being anything more than a below average starter and a decent depth piece. And you don't take a guy like that at 49. I'll bite my words if the Steelers take him at 49 and I ended up being the jerk in all of this. I have him as my 19th overall interior offensive lineman in this class. And I think by 49, the only two I have that have a legit chance of being off the board are Cesar Ruiz from Michigan and maybe Lloyd Cushenberry. I don't see there being 19 interior offensive linemen going off the board in the first 49 picks. So I don't see it. I think, he did decently last year, a large part because of the fact that we're looking at Rutgers compared to Ohio State. Ohio State's a premier football powerhouse year in and year out that has a solid to elite talent all around him. A great quarterback play, great coaching staff. He didn't have that at Rutgers. And when you're a redshirt senior, you should be stepping up against, underclassmen defensive linemen after you haven't shown anything the previous years. That should be your chance to kind of show that you have the ability to do it. And I don't see a guy who will be a starter. And I don't like bashing prospects. That's never been my shtick. I think every prospect can have traits that get pulled out that you can work with. I think it's easy to point the negatives, but you have to look at the positives, what you can pull from this guy. And I think that separates good coaches from great coaches. But I don't see enough to work with to warrant making him one of the top interior offensive linemen in this class. I think last year's situation with Ohio State had more to do with his circumstances less than it does his talent, because I don't think his fundamentals greatly improved from when he was at Rutgers.
Yeah, I'm not the offensive lineman whisperer as you are, so I don't necessarily follow, I want to say, offensive linemen in college particularly as much as you do either. So I really have to defer to you on that. I just kind of was a name that didn't, even being in Ohio, I watch Ohio State. It's one of the few things that it's like if you talk about somebody, when you're talking about J.K. Dobbins or even Jonathan Taylor because he's in the Big Ten, these are things that are in my wheelhouse. So you bring up somebody that's, over, I don't even want to say like ACC or something, but let's say a player in the MAC, then you're kind of, getting outside of where I feel comfortable talking about it. But when I watch all this, I'm just kind of like, okay, that's not a name that really popped off the page to me. Billy Price popped off the page a couple of years ago. There's somebody you could actually talk about when you're talking about maybe top offensive lineman prospects coming out of Ohio State. So that one just kind of, I don't know, it took me by surprise. Just as I was, trying to pick up a few more, I ended up back on this, the one with the Jonah Jackson pick. I was trying to find a couple other ones to pick apart here. And let's see. I'm trying to look and see who else we're finding here. Oh, of course, team needs. Oh, come on. Safety depth is the biggest eyesore on the entire roster. We're talking about guys who are sitting behind guys. We're not talking about anyone that's jumping in to be a starter right away. That just kind of, boggles my mind. Oh, geez. And I could understand who it came from, too. You know what? I'm going to send this to you in the back rooms. We're not even going to discuss this one. It involves a trade of that second pick. They don't even, they're going to move back into the third round and pick up a tackle from Connecticut. Matthew Part.
I saw that. I saw that when you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, come on, man! So they're going to somehow end up with three third round picks. Brian Edwards, wide receiver, South Carolina. Kayvon Wallace, safety at Clemson. Your Clemson guy, and that's their compensatory pick, their regular one. I will not hate that pick. I was looking at that too. I'm wondering, third, fourth round, is that guy there? That one I won't hate so much, but it was just kind of like, okay, I don't do the trades when I do the mocks because it's like that's such a subjective and touchy thing to get involved in. There was another Neville Gallimore sighting in here too. Someone actually did their mock adding Minka Fitzpatrick. They also grabbed J.K. Dobbins then, and I guess that'll make it look even better when you're looking at that. But I think I've pretty much exhausted everything that I can make fun of. So, any other closing thoughts before we get to draft day here? I think I've pretty much said my piece, and just as long as it's... if they got Jalen Hurts in the third round, I wouldn't even be as upset with that. I'm much in the same position as a Rudolph. I just don't understand why people think that somebody like that is going to come in and supersede or be any better immediately even than who was already there. I don't mind some guys eventually getting picked and sitting under the learning tree, but I think eventually what's going to have to happen with the Steelers is they get very lucky with their draft choice. And they have somebody that like an Aaron Rodgers that's going to just sit there and wait, or there may be a few painful years until you find the successor for Roethlisberger, whenever that might be.
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing with the draft, and I think a lot of people want to make snap judgment, and I went on a little rant there about Jonah Jackson, and I never wish ill will on these players. I hope that. When it's all said and done, he ends up becoming a very productive pro and he puts together a long career. I'm never going to wish for these guys to not do it. And I'm also not the type of person, I'm a person who believes that you should sit there and wait for these guys to actually produce before you start bashing their entire career and call them a bust before they even step foot on a football field. Especially this year where you're going to have rookies that aren't going to make as much of an impact necessarily because they don't have the same exposure to the team that they would have. We have rookie minicamp, we have OTAs, we have stuff in the summer, then we have a full training camp. Who knows how much of that we're going to have? I know we're not going to have rookie minicamps, and we're not going to have the same type of OTAs, and who knows what training camp's going to look like this year. So there's a good chance that rookies aren't going to make the same impact this year that they would have in recent years. So before we all start riding off into the sunset, calling all of these guys busts and saying it's a bad pick because draft Twitter told me it was a bad pick, wait and see what these guys do. I know last year I had the bite words with Deontay Johnson. I had Deontay Johnson picked as a late round target. I think I'm in the 6th round in one of my mocks. And third round pick, because I just had overlooked him. I thought he had some nice traits. I never thought he'd go day 2. But he had to take time and really sit there and think about it. It made sense because a lot of people were higher on him than apparently that I was. And I had to eat my words with that. So you have to wait and see what these guys do before you can sit there and make a definitive statement. And also 1 year's worth of production in the league is not enough to sit there and say a player's good or bad. I mean, we had a situation with Bud Dupree where it took him 4 years to really get going, 5 years to really get going. And now all of a sudden, everyone wanted him gone. They wanted to draft a new edge rusher to go opposite T.J. Watt. Now everyone wants to throw the Briggs truck at him. So you have to wait and see what these guys do. If the Steelers pick one of these guys that we mocked, and they're quoting mocked, then we have to figure out, instead of bashing the pick, you might not like the pick, and that's fine. That's your prerogative. But the end of the day is that's the guy they picked. You have to live with it at that point. And you have to see, how can this guy help the team to be successful? Are they going to be an effective player if we see them starting down the road? You have no idea. People criticize the T.J. Watt pick, and now he's an All-Pro and is in the contention for the defensive player of the year. So wait and see what happens. Wait and see what these guys end up doing. I'm hoping it's a pick that I like, because it makes my life a lot easier, and it puts the stress levels much lower when it's a player that I like or mocked. But at the end of the day, wait and see what these guys do before making a definitive statement. It's fine to not like the pick. That's fine. That's human, especially when you have your heart set on somebody. But give them a chance to see what they can do and what they can do to help the team before we start making definitive statements about how good or bad a player is.
I agree. Totally. Like, it's just you can't even judge. Like, now is the time you go back and judge the draft from 4 or 5 years ago, or 1989 as the one that was being replayed on ESPN yesterday, which the Steelers had 3 picks in the top 34, and it was Tim Worley, running back, 7th overall. And it was just, that's one of the ones that didn't work out. You look at things like that. It's just funny. When I was looking at that draft overall, like some of the guys that ended up going, hold on, I'm pulling it up, because this was the one where Mike Merriweather sat out an entire year with a contract dispute and then ended up getting traded to the Vikings. So they ended up with an extra first-round pick. Troy Aikman, top overall. Tony Mandarich to Green Bay, a tackle. Barry Sanders, obviously. Derek Thomas. Deion Sanders. I mean, those are some home runs. Broderick Thomas with Tampa. Tim Worley, 7th overall to the Steelers. And there's many others that are here that, may have been okay, or Eric Metcalf goes to the Browns at 13th. They were making fun of the Jets for taking Jeff Lageman at 14th overall. During this, I was like, wow, people actually did this. And they were interviewing Patriots fans, and the one guy they looked terrible. They had the old Pat the Patriot stuff on, and it's just kind of funny, the time period piece. But they took like Hartley Dukes, a wide receiver from Oklahoma State, and it's just, you go like several rounds later, or several picks later, and Steve Atwater ends up going. And you look at a lot of names. In fact, Steve Wisniewski is here to Dallas at pick 29, because there was 28 picks, because there weren't 32 NFL teams back then. But Carnell Lake was 34th. I'm missing the guy in the middle. Who was the pick that they got 24th? Oh, Tom Ricketts, a guard. So, there's things that are always going to end up happening like that, where not everyone's going to pan out here in the NFL. There's a lot of new blood that get in here. The guys get chewed up, spit out, or just don't. They're sitting behind a entrenched starter or anything like that. By the way, Hartley Dukes only played 2 years in the NFL for the Patriots back then. These were pre-dynasty New England Patriots too, by the way. So they weren't necessarily winning a whole lot of games. In '89, they went 5-11, and hard to believe, but 1990 they were 1-15. So just wow, reminiscing on some of that stuff. That was kind of fun. But we'll be reminiscing again soon. I don't know how we're all going to end up managing this. Maybe we end up having the triangle table here if Brian ends up, getting off his own keister and enjoying. I know he's not enjoying his time. He's been bogged with his own things on the side. I'll just leave it that way. He's had his time consumed, so maybe we get the host who doesn't like toast back on one of these nights during the draft night, or all of them. We all will convene, because the next thing we're going to be talking about is, okay, there's 32 some odd players off the board. The Steelers are going to be picking in about 17 picks. On Friday, we're going to have to figure out what targets are there, who ends up going, because you know what? Some of these names we brought up could very well be gone in that first round.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I think that's, the Steelers are in a unique situation where they can just kind of sit back and relax. I really don't see a scenario where they move into the first round. I think that's been pretty evident at this point. But, they're looking at a situation where they can sit back, see who's there, and they don't have to wait terribly long on day 2 to get their first pick in there, and the picks move a little bit quicker once you get past day 1. So, kind of see who's there, make the right move, and, wait and see what they can do. And as I'm saying this, now I have a gut fear that the pick's going to be Jonah Jackson. I'm going to have to fall back on everything I said here, and I'm
okay. Well, wait a minute. What if Jonah Jackson ends up being in the 4th?
I mean, if he ends up being the pick, I don't see a scenario where regardless where he's drafted, whether it is 49 or if it's one of the 2 picks in the 4th, I don't see a scenario where he starts as a rookie. I think there's too much that needs to be done there. And, again, the thing that stands out to me, if I could pick one thing that I think is going to make him have a chance to stay in the league, it's his aggression. I mean, he plays with that desired type of mean streak you want in offensive lineman. He did that at Rutgers, too. That's the one thing I give him credit for. And he knows what he's doing. It's just a matter of bringing it out. And the Steelers have developed offensive linemen. Maybe he could be the next one. I would sit there and try to find some positive about him being the pick, but I'm not going to be jumping up and down for him. There's a lot of other interior offensive linemen I like more in this class than Jackson, 18 to be exact. So I think realistically that I think he's a guy that could end up. He's a guy I think will be in the league for 10 years maybe, but will bounce around, and I don't see him ever being a long-term option as an offensive lineman. And I for his sake, hope I'm wrong, and I'll eat it if I'm wrong. I've done that before. I know I was wrong with Ronnie Stanley for the Ravens. I thought he wouldn't be what he is now, and I just don't see it. I don't think 49 is a good value no matter which way you spin it. Maybe the 4th round I'd be a little more open to it, but I just don't see it being the move.
Yeah, so how about the other move? This is right at the tail end of us finishing up here. Did you see the Gronk stuff floating around?
Yeah.
He's coming back, apparently. He's going to drop the WWE 24/7 title he won at WrestleMania. He's currently listed on their site as a champion. And, apparently he's going to the Buccaneers with a 7th-round pick from the Patriots still had the rights to him, so they're trading for a 4th-round pick from the Bucs. I don't know. We'll see.
It's an interesting room now. You put him in there with O.J. Howard and, Cameron Brate. Yeah. That's an interesting room.
Yeah, that's real interesting. So is Brady just going to bring all his buddies down there, and then Bruce Arians going to get Brady killed anyways? He's going to Carson Palmer version 2.0. Hey, thanks a lot, man, for joining me once again. We're up against it. We're always over it because we could always chit-chat about football forever. So sometimes the time just flies by. I forget what the heck's going on. You look and you're like, oh, my goodness, you know what? We should probably put a bow on this and we're going to finally get on with it. We're going to see who the picks are. So, Zach, thanks once again for joining not only myself but all the listeners out there.
And thanks for having me. And Jonah Jackson, if you're listening, I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Still OHIO. I love you, man. So anyways, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Send us any of your hate mail along with your interest in the tailgate in the game down in Jacksonville this year. Until later, my name is Joe Kuzma. His name is Zach Meckler, and we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.